Hello and welcome to Rockstar CMO effing marketing podcast, a proud member of the Marketing Podcast Network. I hope you're well and staying as sane as you feel you need to be. I'm your host, Ian Truscott. I'm not a rock star, but I am a CMO. And on this podcast, I chat with a band of marketing chums who share their marketing street knowledge, which I hope will bring out the rockstar marketer in you. Today, as it's Saturday, you might be expecting me to be sipping a cocktail with my chum, Robert Rose, and picking his brains about a marketing question that is top of mind for me this week in our virtual bar, the Rose and Rockstar. However, as we record this on my Friday night, with a time difference between me in the UK and him in California, we only have a narrow window to record in before my family's traditional pizza movie night. Sadly, Robert got stuck in a previous appointment. He sends his apologies as he couldn't join me in the bar. So, you just have me this week. But first, I still need to pay the bar tab. So I'll be back in a moment.
We'll be right back. After this word.
We'll be right back.
After this word. We'll be right back.
Raise the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more to reach the professionals who are more likely to find your ad relevant. Plus, with 1 billion members on LinkedIn, that means you'll have access to 130 million decision makers and 10 million C-level executives. That's a lot of millions of the right people. Get started today and see how you can reach the right buyers with LinkedIn's enhanced targeting tools. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply.
When it comes to relevant content, you may have heard Jeff and me talk about the multis on this show. Multi-channel, multi-device, multi-persona, and multi-language. On that last one, let me ask, how confident are you that your content actually connects in every market? You're not sure? Well, it might be time to check out Phrase. In our experience, this stuff used to be hard, but Phrase makes it simple with its industry-leading AI localization platform that helps you deliver content in multiple languages without losing your tone, your message, or your mind. It automates the manual work, slashes review time, and gives you real data on what's working and where. Brands like Uber and Zendesk trust Phrase to scale their content across the globe and get it right every time. If you're serious about reaching more people and driving better results internationally, head over to phrase.com/MPN and take a look. That's phrase.com/MPN. As it's just me, I thought I'd talk through a topic I prepared for a marketing pros webinar I did about a month ago. And I'm not just repurposing the audio from the video and simply dropping it in here, as this is an audio-only podcast, and you won't be able to see the slides. I'll just talk you guys through what I was thinking. However, I will include a link to the webinar in the show notes, which of course you can find at rockstarcmo.com. I was asked to talk about content marketing. As you know, I have this mantra that marketing needs to create art, awareness, revenue, and trust. So I rolled that all in together. And as it's 2025, it's mandatory to talk about AI. So they asked me to share some tips on that as well. But I may not get to that in this episode. So this could be surprisingly AI free. If you follow me, you may know my art thing, but I'm going to start with that. And then I'm going to share some of the stats you would have heard me and Jeff chat about over the previous episodes. Then how content creates art. There are, of course, 5 effing steps. And then I'll share some outcomes. If you're a regular listener, this won't all be new to you, but hopefully a decent last-minute substitution for my chum, Robert Rose. So let's get started. When I talk about content marketing, often I'll open with some inspiring words from Mark Ritson. And back in 2016, he's pretty cynical about this whole craft. And in an article called Is Content Marketing a Load of Bullshit? He says, the problem appears to be content marketers who, in a modern version of marketing myopia, seem to think that their reason for existence is to create content rather than communicate with clients and sell stuff. Now, I guess he's got a point. I mean, it is easy to get sort of sucked into what I call the hamster wheel of just creating content. We need to remain focused on what that goal is. And that's really where this art thing comes in. So we need to create art, not content. And you know what I mean by art, as I've said already, as we were leading up to this, is my view is that art, we need to create awareness, revenue, and trust. And the genesis of this was, I think it was my first CMO gig, and I was looking for some language to use to communicate the value of what I was doing, both regular digital marketing and all the other good stuff, events, as well as the content marketing with the C-suite. And I felt that awareness, revenue, and trust were terms that everybody can understand. And of course, it makes a nice acronym of art. Now, if you talk to salespeople, they don't want art. They want rats because they think revenue needs to come first. But of course, there is no revenue or R without the A and the T. And I didn't really want to go around saying that I create rats. I'd rather say that I create art. So that's where this kind of whole art thing comes from. And to extend this sort of analogy, I also talk about the fact that we need to create art, not war. So what is art? Art are measurable acts of awareness, revenue, and trust. And what's war? Wasteful acts of randomness. Now, we all know as marketers, right, that those kinds of things that come in, the sorts of things you do because you've always done them, because your competitors do them, or because an executive read an in-flight magazine or a LinkedIn post or his nephew's on TickFace, right? That's war. That's wasteful acts of randomness. So why is it important that we have this kind of mantra? Maybe art isn't the one for you, but it is important that you have a kind of a set of metrics to go by, a sort of a high level set of goals that you can communicate to your C-suite with, that connects marketing value to business value. And the reason why it's important to do that is because at some point you're going to need to ask why. So when you think about that idea from the CEO's nephew or from an airline magazine or from LinkedIn, you need to be able to defend when you ask why. Is this, for me, I can say, will this create art? Will this create awareness, revenue, and trust? If it will, then this could be a good idea and it makes it through that gate. If somebody comes in and says to you, we need to be on TickFace, and you've got no quick way to defend that decision, then you're going to have to go away and prove why it's good or bad to actually go ahead and open up a new channel or do more video or make the logo bigger, whatever the suggestion is that's coming into the marketing team. So how does content create art? What's the specific thing about content marketing that helps you raise awareness, revenue, and trust? Well, I'm going to start off with some of the stats, as I mentioned before. You've probably heard me and Jeff talk about these on the show in the past. And I really like this sort of set of metrics that have come from some great research. So if we start off with the 95% rule that you've probably heard from LinkedIn, right? That only 5% of our potential buyers are in the market right now, and the other 95% will enter the market at some point. That's assuming that you've got a very well identified ICP, right? You know that not all of those people in your ICP, your ideal customer profile, are going to be in market right now. And in your category, that may be 60-40, it may be 70-30. It may not be 95% rule that came out of the LinkedIn research, and I'll include links to all this stuff obviously in the show notes. But you've probably heard that before. So the big majority of people that you want to engage with you in a sales at some point are not currently in market. So they're not currently researching. They're not currently putting their hands up and being identified on your in your marketing teams, right? In your marketing metrics, or engaging with your content, or signing up to your forums, or to having a demo, or any of those things, any of those signals that we can recognize in our marketing automation platforms. Now, if you then move on from that LinkedIn research and look at some work that Sixth Sense have done, and again, this is the sort of thing that me and Jeff talk about quite a lot on the podcast, is that by the time somebody actually does put their hand up and come and speak to a sales rep, what Sixth Sense found was that 78% either had already determined their solution requirements, or there was only a very slight change between them identifying those requirements on their own and what the sales guy was, or the vendor salesperson, the vendor was able to sort of change. Like when I was coming up in sales, we always used to talk about re-engineering the buyer's vision, basically educating them on a way of doing things that worked well with your product. Today, there's very little option to do that once the buyer is already talking to your sales rep, because this research shows that people are pretty much, when the buyer puts their hand up, contacts the vendor, they pretty much know what they want because they've done a whole bunch of research already. Now, more worryingly, if you're one of those vendors, is that 84% of buyers, according to this research, will ultimately choose the first vendor they contact. So it indicates they've already chosen a solid front runner before they make contact with the vendor. And so us focusing on that narrow group of people that are both our ICP and now in our traditional funnel, there's very little upside on that in terms of changing their mind or moving them in terms of convincing them, persuading them to our way of thinking. And if you you need enough a kind of, when I present this visually, then I show what this looks like. If you look at those numbers, that the 95.955% rule, and then you look at how few people are actually persuadable, if you like, once they do meet a sales rep, it's a very small number of people. And so that means that we need to focus beyond the funnel. We need to focus on those people we don't know yet, that we don't know about, right? And some people call this like the dark funnel, or the dark, the bit above the funnel. And I think of it as not a funnel at all. It's actually, there's this big bucket of people. If you think about the 100% of the people, of buyers in your ICP, are sitting in that top level, that big bucket, and it has a very small spout on the bottom. If you think about the 5% that are going to pop out of that, and those 5%, as we just described, they're not particularly persuadable. They're pretty much ready to transact with the person they want to transact with. They may have to go through a procurement process and involve a number of different options, but there's very little opportunity there to change. So where we need to influence our potential buyer is in that big bucket at the top that I call the dark bucket, right? Which is those buyers who are currently not in market and currently not looking at your solution. They're not looking at your website. They're not signing up for demos. They're not doing anything like that. They're not on your marketing automation radar. And it's really messy in the big bucket. So let me hit you with one last stat. I think it's the last stat in this section of my presentation. Is it's actually quite messy in the big bucket. So Dream Data, who also do some research into this, and the cool thing about some of these stats, particularly 6 Sense and this from Dream Data, is this is really good content marketing in itself. I think if you can get insight from your customers and you can share them with the market, then that's great content marketing. And so I love sharing these stats because I think not only do they support that you need to do great content marketing, they are actually great content marketing. Anyway, back to this Dream Data stats. So what Dream Data have found, and if you're not familiar with the Dream Data platform, it basically tracks all of the interactions that a potential customer has with you on their way to signing up for your product. So it's really built for like B2B SaaS, the high volume kind of products. And it will, once it knows the people that are interacting with your website, it will then track what they're doing from the very earliest awareness stage all the way through to when they buy something from you. And they found, and this is, not through surveys, this is from the data that they've seen in their product, is the average B2B customer journey has 62.4 touches across 3.6 channels and involves 6.3 contacts over 192 days. Now, if I break those numbers down for you, that means that in that big dark bucket, there are a lot of touches. The potential buyer is going to touch you a lot of times. They're going to do that across a number of different channels. And of course, as we know, B2B isn't an individual. That's why that's the folly of the marketing qualified lead, right? Is that there's actually 6 people involved in this, and they're all touching as well. So this is the challenge that we have in the dark bucket. A lot of people, a lot of touches, and it's really messy. Plus, of course, at this point, then the dream data is actually tracking from that point. Then we know that these people exist. Remember, in the big dark bucket, people are making decisions about how to solve their problem, independently, perhaps, of touching a vendor at that point. One of the other things that I talk about a lot as well, which I think is where our content can come in, is the reason why I think there are so many touches and why a sort of B2B sale is so tough, and you'll see this a lot in sort of B2B marketing and sales advice, is our biggest competitor is do nothing, right? Is make do with the spreadsheet or the shonky old system they've got right now, because making a decision is actually, there's some friction involved. And the way that I describe that friction is I call it fear of fucking up. So, and I think that everybody is what I've described in a previous blog post, fofu fighting, right? So because making a B2B buying decision is actually very emotional. Because there's a lot on this. There's the not only are they going to need to make a financial commitment which may expose them to the CFO, their people that work for them are going to look at this tool and judge them based on that tool, their peers, all that good stuff, right? There's a lot of emotion around a B2B buying decision, and we need to help them overcome that fear of fucking up. Then there's the other sort of role that I think the content marketing plays, and the one that we are so challenged with in marketing right now, is that we need to build trust in the brand, and we need to build our brand. Now, brand seems to have become a bit of a dirty word recently, because that's that thing you can't measure so well as you can as your digital marketing or your media tactics. And it's really the long, and this is referring to, the famous book by Les Binet and Peter Field, the long and the short of it, is that we need to be making both of those bets. We need to be making bets that are going to give us a return long term. And then we need to also be making bets that are going to give us strategic short-term gains, because if we don't do the short-term stuff, we're not going to be around long enough to see the return on the long-term stuff. But as we know, brand trust is a marketing multiplier. If people trust your brand, they're more likely to click on your PPC ads. They're more likely to engage with your ads on other channels. They're more likely to trust your content that's coming through. So therefore, building brand trust, this thing that's notoriously difficult to measure, is a marketing multiplier. And you will see the impact of that, not only across all of your marketing metrics, but you'll also see that in terms of, and we talked about this a few weeks ago, you'll also see this in terms of customer loyalty, reduction in churn, all those good things. So that's really that last part there, those things I just talked about. That's how content creates art, right? It reaches into the dark bucket where buyers are making that choice, and they're making that choice before they necessarily will be in contact with us, whether before they talk to a sales rep or any of those things. And it works both long-term and short-term. I mean, we know, right? You can create tactical pieces of content. They're going to help you this quarter, next quarter. But there's also going to be the great evergreen content you're going to create. There's big research projects we might do. There's thought leadership we can create. And that might stand the test of time. But that's going to build brand trust. That is going to be a long-term benefit. And of course, it can help fight FOFU, because what you're going to do if through your content marketing, if you share things like case studies and those kinds of things, is then you will allay that fear of fucking up. So, as it's the Rockstar CMO effing marketing podcast, and you know my editorial policy, if you've listened to any of our shows before, particularly the ones with Jeff, I have 5 effing steps to take us through how we create art with content. And you've probably heard these steps before, because as you know, me and Jeff have joked on this podcast before, is that you sort of, there are some standard things that we all need to do when we're creating a campaign or we're doing anything. And the first one, of course, is you need to know why. So creating content is fun, and it's very visible. People see us doing stuff. It's a very, you get the sort of dopamine hits of creating content. And it's a visible thing. Marketing can show what they're doing, but you still need to be clear about your why. What are your goals and objectives for your content? the specific needs of your company and its goals. And I'm very keen on that piece. And again, something we've talked a lot about on this podcast is not just, you can't just move from company to company and just assume that, like I've got this art thing, right? That is going to work in every single organization, because different organizations have different needs along different parts of where they are in terms of where that organization is. It might be a turnaround, it might be a startup, it might be that they're doing some kind of pivot in the market, or there's a big change in the market. So they're going to need differing amounts of awareness, revenue, and trust. And that's really going to have to drive your goals. What are the important things that you need to get across in terms of your content? And that, you need to know why. And I don't mean know your why as in Simon Sinek's thing. It isn't about that. This is knowing why you're doing something. Again, the second step is what we talk a lot about on this podcast is obviously you need to do the knowledge. So you need to know who are the buyers, who are the influencers, and what they need. Now, again, something I've probably talked about a bit on this podcast is when I create personas, I tend to focus less on job titles and those kinds of things, and more on clusters of need. So what is it that they need? So if you think about a risk-averse CFO or a risk-averse CEO, they've got different job titles, but what they may have in common is they may need certain pieces of content to help, make this decision about this particular product or service. You also need to understand the category trends. So what's happening in your category? What is it that everybody's talking about? What is it that everybody's predicting for it? What are the challenges with the category? Is this a growing category that everyone's excited about? Or is it something that's shrinking? You've got to understand that part of it as well, and understand those category trends so that you can resonate with the market. And also remember that, the buyer that you're trying to communicate with, they're the heroes of the story. And we need to know their plot. This isn't about us. This isn't about our company. This isn't about our features or our product. This is about what they need. The third step is to be useful. So really keying off of that last thing about needs, in a twist to the famous Steve Jobs quote about people not caring about your products or services, buyers don't care about your content either, right? They care about the content that helps them. So I think that I shared this a couple of weeks ago when I was chatting with Jeff. The sort of model that I quite like is, the phrase, as a persona, I would like this information so I can accomplish this goal. And that's sort of difficult to talk through, but if you can imagine that you can change that phrase. So as the CFO, I would like ROI returns so I can accomplish, profitability at the end of the year, whatever it is. That's probably a poor example. But if you can think about how is it your content can be useful to the different people in your buyer group and different personas, then I think one of the, and so far so good, right? So you're probably, so what, Ian? Yeah, I get it. So you need to know why you're doing stuff. You need to do your research, and then you need to figure out how to be useful. And I think one of the things that I think that people often miss is why you. So when I was an analyst, I was an analyst briefly. When I used to get briefings from vendors, I'd get the same kind of, these are the trends that are happening in the market. Now, as an analyst, you kind of know what the trends are happening in the market, but let's ignore that for a moment. The key thing there is what they weren't expressing was their own unique take on it. Why should I be listening to them? What have they got to say about this? Because, and it's the same, it'll be the same for you in your category with your content. Your audience has no shortage of content to choose from. And especially, I was going to not mention AI, but I have to, right? Because getting some really in-depth research about your category is a ChatGPT prompt away, right? It's not that hard to get content about it. So you need to be really specific about why you. So if you look at some of the quotes that I've used and you see everybody using these quotes from people like 6 Sense or Dream Data or LinkedIn, is because they've done the work and done the research, and they're credible because of the audience that they have or the data they happen to have. LinkedIn's got that great data set of all of our information ever. and Dream Data have got this big data set of interaction, customer interactions, and 6 Sense similar. So why is it that somebody should come to you for this particular piece of content? And what unique perspective, research, or experience can you bring that makes your content compelling? So I was a CMO of a company that had a number of ESP products in its portfolio. Now, one of the really interesting things they did every year was they would look at the email trends that they were seeing in their database. So you can quickly see trends like, oh, look, the open rate for emails that are sent on a Saturday is really high or whatever. So you've got all of this data sitting there that you can anonymize, that you can share, that is actually a really interesting statistic for the category. And then you go on and see, as 6 Sense do, as Dream Data do, as LinkedIn do, you see these stats then being used in other people's content. So therefore, you get some reach with your messaging because it's good content. It's good research. It's good data. The fifth tip, so the fourth tip there was why you. The fifth tip is you need to launch it like a product. And you've probably heard this advice lots of times too. But, build it and they ain't coming, are they? You need to think like a media company or a publisher. Your content is actually a product. How do you launch it, market it, and reach your audience? Your content is like a publication with your ad in it, right? It isn't, it isn't the ad. So you need to think about, how do you get this publication? How do you get this piece of content in front of as many people as you can? And I think this is also where you can start thinking about whether you want to be gating things or ungating things, what channels you want to put them on. Are you worried about generative AI indexing this? All that good stuff. This is where you really need to start thinking about, what's the value of your content and thinking of it like a product. So those are my 5 steps for creating art with content. And now I'm going to move on to what are the outcomes really of creating artful content, as I described it for the Marketing Pros audience. And there are a couple of these. Is there 5? I'm just looking at the slides now. So the first one of these, if you think about, how does it create awareness? What's the goal for our awareness? Well, our goal is to get noticed and remembered by the right audience. So what do we need to do? So the content that we can publish is bold, thought leadership, and point of view driven content. So here, if you're creating awareness, this is about getting out there who you are and what it is that your point of view is on the important topics in your category and the important needs of your audience and your buyer. And the metric that you're going to measure is going to be brand recall uplift, growth in new audience reach, subscribers, all of that good stuff. The next one is, how does this content drive revenue? What's the goal here? Well, the goal's obvious, right? We want to drive action that supports sales and pipeline growth. So the tactic that we're going to do is we need to create what I'm calling here decision stage assets. So I know that there's a lot of debate about the buyer's journey and all this kind of stuff. And we know that it's not completely linear. People dip in, dip out. There's a whole group of people that are involved in a buyer's journey. Some people in your buying persona group, in your buying group are going to come into the journey at different points, all that kind of. So it's not clean. It's not a clean journey. I get that. But there are still stages that people go through. So people become aware of you, your product and service. They'll move through. Now, you need to think about what is it that's going to take them from one stage to the next in your buyer's journey. So that's why I'm calling these decision stage assets. So things like case studies and ROI tools, for example. So a great case study, right? When somebody's kind of in that top of funnel, we'll move them through. And then when they're really looking to buy and they're looking at the price, they're going to want to understand ROI. So as people get deeper into your products, whether you've described this as a proper journey or not, at some point, they're going to want to know what the ROI is on the product as they get close to buy. They're also going to want to know the price and all that other good stuff as well. So one of the metrics I like to use, not just revenue itself, although that's incredibly important, and it's very important for us to be very aware of revenue and to be very interested in the revenue, is look at the drive to intent pages that sort of that you know will drive towards revenue. So this is like people looking at things like pricing pages, or they're looking at booking a demo and those kinds of things. If you think about the important content that's going to sort of trigger somebody to get close to buying something from you. The third thing, of course, is how does this content build trust? So the goal here is you want to earn buyer confidence and loyalty through your credibility. And the tactic here is, this is where you really want to be leaning into the proof points, right? And also some what I described to Martin Pross in that presentation as transparent narratives. So this is like real stories about, people using your product, people, the buyer's journey they went through, the alternatives they might have used, they might have considered, and really sort of build that trust around, what it's like to work with you, what the promised land looks like when they implement your platform or service, or work with your with your services, and then what does that look? So those are the tactics you want to use, and the metrics, obviously, positive sentiment. So if you're fortunate enough to have a larger budget and a larger audience, then you can look at sentiment analysis of whether people recommend you and those kinds of things. But also, even for a smaller startup, you can see return visits, and you can also see sort of like trust signals in the feedback and what you're getting back from the sales team about what the questions are being asked and what people are self-serving, what content they're looking at, and those kinds of things. Now, then, as you know, or may not know, sorry, if you're a regular listener, you may have heard us talk about our buyer's journey here on Rockstar CMO. So what we talk about is a sort of a 5-step journey. Weirdly, 5 steps, 5 effort steps again. And we talk about awareness, so that first stage. Then we talk about muse, which is where somebody's kind of getting inspired to engage with you. So we call that muse. Then there's the purchase stage. Then there's the engage stage, where we're actually engaging with them. This is post-purchase, and they're getting to know the product and they're getting to know us. And then we need to develop that customer again, so they move back into purchase, because nowadays, obviously, most of us have a SaaS product. So people will need to renew, or they'll need to upbeat, or we want to upsell them something, or move forward. There's no sort of one and done and ignore them for 3 years like they used to be in perpetual software. So, and we call that the amped buyer's journey. So that's our buyer's journey. And so if you think about the things that I just talked about just now, is how do we move people from awareness to muse? How do we move people from muse to purchase, et cetera, et cetera? Now, what I then recommend is, and whatever buyer's journey you use, I'm not suggesting that ours is the right one for you. And it's the same with the awareness, revenue, and trust, right? Is you'll have your own goals, and you'll have your own buyer's journey. You'll understand your own buyers, and you'll know what they go through. The important thing here is that you audit your content to ensure that you've got coverage that covers whatever your version of art is and your customer journey, and then do a gap analysis of that. What podcast episode could happen on Rockstar CMO without us referring to a gap analysis, and then create a plan. And the important part of that is because you can often see that you're skewing too far one way or another way, right? You're doing too much stuff around the awareness phase, but you're not doing enough to nurture the customer post-sale. And remember, post-sale is an important point in customers' life cycle, because that you want them to progress to become an advocate. You want them to provide you with those case studies and those referrals and all that kind of good stuff. And also that's where the other part of FOFU is going to kick in. So before they buy, they were having FOFU, fear of fucking up. Now, once they do buy, they're potentially going to have some buyer's remorse and be a bit concerned about whether they made the right decision. So we need to reassure them with our content when we do that. And then one of the things that I tossed into my presentation to marketing profs, I recommend to almost everybody, is there's a really good Medium post by a chap called Andy Raskin, and this must be, I don't know, a decade old, something like that. And he shares the greatest sales deck he's ever seen. In fact, if you search the greatest sales deck I've ever seen, you'll find this article. You're probably familiar with it. I mean, it's quite a popular article. And what I like is the story structure that goes with this. And what I encourage people to do is follow this structure. So even if you're just writing a blog post or you're thinking about a whole campaign, these 5 steps I think are pretty cool. So the first thing is you identify that there's a change in the world. So if you identify what is the change in the world, what's happening in your category, what's the buyer's needs, what's changed for them? And remember, I mean, for fear of letting this thing run for an hour, one of the things I'm quite passionate about here is that as B2B marketers, we're selling change, right? Somebody has to do something different in order to implement whatever it is that we're selling, whether it's a product, a solution, or a service, right? So identify there's a change in the world. Number 2, identify there'll be winners and losers. So what you're doing here is it's showing you're trying to combat that do nothing thing, right? It's a bit like the challenger sale. This is what will happen. This is what people who embrace this problem and solve it, this is what happens for them. This is what it looks like for them. And if you don't, this is what could happen to you if you don't. And the 3rd step is to show that promised land. So this is how things could work once they solve this problem, they have their need. Now, this promised land isn't once they implement and install your software or employ your service. We're not talking about us at this point at all. What we're saying is, if you solve this problem, this is how the world is going to look for you. You're going to look like this. You're going to be, more promotable or more successful or whatever it is, right? And it's quite difficult to share an example here because, every category is different. But this is the thing that you could have happen for you and could solve everything. Now we start talking about ourselves. So what are the gifts that you have that can take them there? What are the specific things, particularly if you can find differentiated things about your product or service that will take them to the promised land? So here, and then, of course, the 5th thing is that we need to prove that. You can't just say that, you're going to see 100% ROI or anything like that. It has to be that we're going to show proof of that. So this is where your case studies, your anecdotes and all that good stuff comes in at the end. So, and I really like this story structure. And I often, even if I'm writing something fairly short, I'll think about this structure because I think it makes for a really good narrative. So just a reminder, that's the greatest sales deck I've ever seen by Andy Raskin, if you search for that. And those 5 steps are, number 1, there's a change in the world. Number 2, there'll be winners and losers. Number 3, show the promised land. Number 4, share the gifts that take them there. And number 5, show proof. So that's kind of, I'm going to conclude with that because I then went on in the Marketing Profs webinar, and you can go see it. I'll include a link in the show notes to that. I then talked about how AI can help you create art, but I've gone over 30 minutes now, so it's a long podcast episode for us on a Saturday. So I'll conclude there, and I hope that you enjoyed. Well, thanks for bearing with me in the absence of Robert. And like I say, I'll add into the show notes the link to the webinar, and you can go and see it, the whole thing there. So that's a wrap on this special solo episode of the Rockstar CMO effing marketing podcast. Apologies again for no Robert, but I suspect you know where to get your fix of Mr. Rose, either on the Content Marketing Institute blog or his podcast, This Old Marketing, which is actually quite fun this week if you pick up this week's episode. I'd love to hear from you, especially when I do these solo episodes. So please reach out via the website or LinkedIn. Just search Rockstar CMO. I'm sure you'll find us, or just keep listening. I'm glad you're here. Coming up this week on Rockstar CMO FM, on Wednesday, Jeff is back in the studio. We'll be discussing, can't remember what we'll be discussing this week, but we'll be discussing something. And hopefully, well, I'm assured that Robert will be back on Saturday in the bar. And in the meantime, just remember, as Dewey Finn said in the film, The School of Rock, you can't just say it, man. You've got to feel it in your blood and guts if you want to rock.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Hennika Watkins-Porter hosts The Entrepreneurial You, empowering entrepreneurs with insights on leadership, business, and success. Hennika, tell listeners what to expect from your show.
So we provide innovative business strategies and practical solutions to common entrepreneurial challenges.
And where can people subscribe?
Find us at hennikawatkinsporter.com, as well as the Marketing Podcast Network at marketingpodcasts.net, or search for it wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.